Here's a real astronomical illustration of the Doppler effect. The gases swirling around a distant galactic disk that are moving toward Earth produce a blue shift. Those moving away produce a red shift. It was at Mount Wilson Observatory in the 1920s that Hubble utilized its new 100-inch reflector, the largest telescope of that day, to discover that light arriving from distant galaxies was redshifted in an orderly way. In 1929, he published his findings. The greater the redshift, the greater the distance a galaxy was from the Earth. This was a monumental discovery, as shown in this graphic, that modern astronomy has confirmed. It was also very puzzling. Hubble and other astronomers had observed redshifts of different galaxies but didn't recognize the systematic trends. Previously, the universe was thought to be static and unchanging. Now it was shown to have an unexpected kind of order. This animation illustrates how the redshift increases as a galaxy moves further and further from the Earth. The preeminent question was, and still is, what assumption should be used to interpret Hubble's discovery? Before discussing Hubble's assumptions and the conclusions he drew, we first determine the outcome if the Doppler interpretation is used. In that case, these graphics clearly show that galaxies both far and near are receding from us, spreading out from us, if you please, in an orderly manner. The spherical symmetry of the galactic recession from our observation point is again extraordinary evidence of the existence of a nearby center of the universe. Why then didn't Hubble report this discovery over 75 years ago? The answer is in his 1937 book, The Observational Approach to Cosmology. On page 51, he stated, "The unwelcome supposition of a favored location must be avoided at all costs." On page 59, he spoke of ways to escape the horror of a unique position, which was also said to be intolerable. And on page 54, he emphasized, there must be no favored location in the universe, no center, no boundary. All must see the universe alike.
It's really obvious, then, that Hubble engaged himself in the most extraordinary denial of fact in all the history of science in his attempt to get rid of the center and demand the universe be everywhere the same. These three graphics show, however, this could not be accomplished using the Doppler assumption. If, for example, observer number 1 sees redshifts of galaxies moving away from his position, and a distant observer number 2 sees redshifts of galaxies moving away from his position, then each will observe a universe full of blue-shifted galaxies mixed in uniformly with red-shifted galaxies. But this is not observed. So it's impossible to get rid of the center using the Doppler interpretation of Hubble's redshift discovery. So, how did Hubble and all astronomers since then evade it? This they did by adopting a new untested assumption about redshift called space-time expansion. As this illustration shows, space-time expansion assumedly causes light to be redshifted as it travels across the universe, independent of the Doppler effect. It was postulated to cause galaxies to move apart and wavelengths of light to expand as space itself expanded. This idea was adopted over 70 years ago, but remained untested until David and I did so and found proof it has always been wrong.
The reason? Light wavelength expansion means the loss of energy. The total non-conservation of energy loss of all the light particles in the universe due to this imaginary process equals over 30 million times the mass of the universe. Details of this are available on the Internet report Archive GRQC 9806061 at orionfdn.org.
Galaxy motion is also assumed to be magically affected somehow, causing each galaxy to move away from every other galaxy as space itself expands, and in this way make it appear the universe is everywhere the same. But it's easy to show it's the greatest scientific blunder of all time. All we have to do is examine what three of the greatest authorities on the Big Bang say when trying to convince their physics graduate students that it is genuine. Of all the disturbing implications of the expansion of the universe, none is more upsetting to many a student on first encounter than the nonsense of this idea. The universe expands. The distance between one cluster of galaxies and another cluster expands. The distance between Sun and Earth expands. The length of a meter stick expands. The atom expands. Then how can it make any sense to speak of any expansion at all? Expansion relative to what? Expansion relative to nonsense. Only later does he realize that the atom does not expand. The meter stick does not expand. The distance between Sun and Earth does not expand. Only distances between clusters of galaxies and greater distances are subject to the expansion. Only at this gigantic scale of averaging does the notion of homogeneity make sense. Not so at smaller distances. No model more quickly illustrates the actual situation than a rubber balloon with pennies affixed to it, each by a drop of glue. As the balloon is inflated, the pennies increase their separation one from another, but not a single one of them expands. From the book Gravitation by C.W. Misner, Kip Thorne, and J.A. Wheeler, published by W.H. Freeman and Company, 1973, page 719, and section 27.5. Here is the balloon doublespeak illustration that Misner, Thorne, and Wheeler's book uses to intimidate their graduate students to accept expansion. But the simple example of galaxies projected on screens at increasing distances from a projector reveals the fatal flaw in their illustration. They show that expansion, if it ever existed, would cause galaxies to expand in size as well as separate from each other. Here is another illustration proving the same point. Namely, if expansion had ever existed, galaxies would have expanded into smithereens. Obviously, no galaxies would ever have formed in the first place.
But as we saw earlier, the universe is full of them, more than 1,000 billion trillion, each one silently testifying that the space-time expansion hypothesis has always been an imaginary effect, and hence that Big Bang has always been nothing more than a big fizzle, just the figment of the imagination of those who vainly tried to wipe the remembrance of God from His universe. While the Big Bang collapses under its own contradictions, we now begin to understand the true significance of Hubble's discovery. There really is a nearby center of the universe. And this cosmic center of the universe illustration shows how galaxies diminish in size and increase in redshift as they move further from the center. So what is the significance of the center? What does it all mean? In Isaiah 40, verse 21, the Bible speaks of God spreading out the heavens, an obvious reference to the expansion of the universe we've been discussing. Also obvious is that their outward motion, their spreading out, implies there is a point of origin, a definite location from which they are spreading out from. Which point could that be?
In Psalm 103:19, the Bible says, "Thy throne, O Lord, is established in the heavens," which we also identify with the location of the great white throne described in Revelation 20, verse 11. It's just that simple. In fact, this graphic briefly illustrates the new cosmic model. It contrasts visible galaxies receding from the nearby center with our recently discovered outer shell of galaxies that encloses the visible universe. Light from the outer galaxies cannot be seen by telescopes because vacuum gravity has shifted it down to become the well-known cosmic microwave radiation. My December 2004 article in Perspectives in Science and Christian Faith identifies the galaxies in the visible universe as originating in the Genesis creation, while those in the outer shell are ascribed to a separate, earlier creation.